bad they actually are at baseball.
Yeah, exactly. Like I can point to you and say this is a spot where the ownership probably outweighs the likelihood that this guy fails, but at the same time, it's still just a really ugly spot to try and take. And there's a couple of those. So I do think this slate's weird in that the approach probably differs a little bit more than normal based on how you play. If you're playing 150 lineups, obviously you can be contrarian within lineups without having to take, massive stands across your player pool. But if you're hand building like 5 lineups or something like that, it is a slate where I would be more inclined to take some of those really ugly pivots and just hope that they come through because I think that ownership is going to be very concentrated today, and for good reason, projection wise. But if you're trying to give yourself some kind of an edge, despite not having as many entries as other people, you need to be willing to take bigger risks.
No doubt about it. And it's one of these nights where there are some pretty bad arms on the mound, and even some of the good ones have a lot of blow up potential. The early slate, we saw the Brewers put 11 runs up. We saw the A's put up 17. We saw the Rangers put up 16, 13 combined between the Nationals and the Mets. I wouldn't be surprised. Now, obviously, I'm not saying I expect positional players to come in for 3 teams, right? But I wouldn't be surprised to see a good amount of games. I don't want to say get out of hand, but with a lot of runs on the board. And one of the reasons I say that is a good amount of these totals in tonight's games have gone up quite a bit throughout the day. And now you have three teams at 5 or higher, and then one at 4.9, two at 4.7. And that's on a 5-game slate, right? That's a 10 teams, and 6 of them are at 4.7 or at 4.6 or higher. Only 3 teams at 4 or lower, which means pitching is going to be a bitch. But also you're going to need to get the hitters right, of course, as always. I just think you could see a lot of high run totals. So let's get into it. Cincinnati and the Chicago Cubs, Luis Castillo, Jose Quintana. It's not the greatest on paper matchup for Castillo, but he's just been spectacular this year. And, I talked about this with Jake on the strategy show this morning. You can check that out Monday through Friday around 9:30 a.m. Eastern time, 5 days a week. And I'm sure you know this, you wrote the deep dive today. His whiff rate on the changeup, like this is one of the best pitches in baseball. He has a 33% whiff rate on it, Adam. Like it's flat out silly. And against lefties, he's got a whiff rate of 29%. I guess it was righties that it's 36 or so, 38%. And he uses it 30+% of the time. It really is one of the filthiest pitches in baseball right now.
Yeah, really, really good pitch for him. And he's always had that really good changeup where he gets swings and misses. Where he used to get in trouble in the past was that he would not have good control or good command, sorry, of his, in particular, his 2-seam fastball, which he's throwing about 16.5% of the time to lefties. It would just kind of leak back out over the plate and get absolutely blasted. That hasn't been the case this year. He's, like I said, throwing it 16.5% of the time, a .041 expected ISO on the pitch, 0 actual ISO allowed. His 4-seam fastball is allowed at 209 expected ISO, 150 actual ISO. That's been his worst pitch to lefties, but throwing the changeup just as often as that 4-seam fastball, getting tremendous results on that, like you said. And while the Cubs rank in the middle of the pack in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching, and they have the 3rd highest walk percentage, which is concerning given that the biggest weakness for Castillo is an elevated walk percentage. This isn't the scariest lineup. You still don't have Anthony Rizzo in there. You have Kyle Schwarber leading off, who, while he does have power, he's one of the highest strikeout guys on the team. It's not that bad of a lineup compared to what it could be. So I do really like Castillo here. Obviously, he's expensive and you have limited options. In my initial crunch, I was getting around 50-55%, which is where I had him capped across my 600 lineups that I crunched. Once I ranked them based on our current ownership projections, I came in around 40% on DraftKings on Castillo. But I'm perfectly happy to get more of that. Hopefully I do in my final crunches, because he's very clearly the most talented pitcher on this slate. And like I said, it's not the scariest lineup when you have Schwarber leading off at a 28% strikeout percentage. You have Albert Almora in there at the bottom, Caratini's in there. It's not the best Cubs lineup.
Yeah, it's a good point. It could be a whole lot. It could be a whole lot more concerning. And you pointed out some of the the spots that make this a better matchup. Right now, you have a 3.9 total for the Chicago Cubs. It's the second lowest on the slate. So, did you run crunches?
Yeah, I ran some 5-mans before the show, and then I actually got them ranked based on our current ownership projections too. So I have a little bit of an idea of where I would be ending up if the slate were starting right now.
So, with Castillo, how much do you think you'd have?
In my crunches, I had him capped like 50 to 55%, so he was hitting that. And then once I ranked based on ownership, I got to around 40% on DraftKings.
Okay. Now, the other side is Jose Quintana, who got off to a blistering hot start this year. Outside of one really rough game in Milwaukee where a lot of pitchers struggle, he had been lights out. 7+ strikeouts and 4 of 5 starts to get the season underway. And then against Arizona, against St. Louis, he couldn't get any swings and misses. Actually, he may have. I didn't look at his swing and strike rate, just the strikeout totals. And then against Milwaukee, gave up 3 runs, struck out 6. But do you think Jose Quintana, like, honestly, I think he's somewhere in between, and he's a decent pitcher, but he's not great. Now he's a lefty that comes into arguably the best righty power park in baseball. I guess the question is this a Cincinnati lineup that you like? And if not, are you looking at Quintana here? Because no surprise, a lot of righties in this lineup for the Reds, only 2 lefties.
Yeah, I'm not getting to Quintana, just not a good park to pitch in. There's not a ton of strikeouts in the Cincinnati lineup. There is some right-handed power, and Quintana's just not really a high strikeout pitcher. He's not a guy that I roster all that often outside of really favorable matchups. I think that the bigger question here is more what to do with the Cincinnati bats, because according to the stack tool on awesemo.com, Cincinnati right now is projected to be one of the most over-owned stacks when you compare the ownership of the stack to the likelihood of them having the highest score on the slate. That's not to say that they're bad plays, because you do have some cheap guys here. Joey Votto, lefty, but with only 3,500 hitting second. Nick Senzel is leading off. Suarez has a ton of power. And then I mentioned in the deep dive article that second base in particular and shortstop to a little bit lesser extent are really weak positions. And you can go to the Reds for cheap guys there with Iglesias and Peraza. Not that they're good, just that they are cheap and you can move on. So there is merit to getting to Cincinnati, but from a full stack perspective, maybe a little bit over-owned because of the price tags, and Quintana is really not a bad pitcher. So I wasn't getting to them as one of my top 3 stacks, but I think they were like top 5.
Yeah, it's similar to, I think, so like the Oakland Athletics had a very low total this afternoon, but they were so cheap that it's kind of one of those spots where it's like, okay, I'll go with some Oakland anyway because they're really discounted. When it comes to this Reds team, for most of the season, they've been priced pretty high, but outside of Suarez, they're all pretty affordable now, which is definitely going to force ownership over there. Not to mention the really good park. So I do like them, but like you said, if they're going to be super popular, it's not crazy to get away from them. Now, granted, let me ask you this question, and look, we have 4 games to go. We've got our time, but so they have a 4.7 total. That's not even what's important to me. The question would be, like, yes, Cincinnati's going to have ownership, but it is also only a 5-game slate. So if you're pivoting to the non-chalk, right, to the bats that aren't popular, are any of them worth it? In that, like, you could actually, it's baseball, anything could happen, but worth it in that you actually kind of like the matchup and think that there's something the field is missing? Because on bigger slates, there's always something that you and I can point out here. Do you see that on such a short slate like this, though?
I wouldn't say that there's a spot that I really like that I think the field is missing something. It's more so that I think there's huge question marks with every single offensive matchup here.
Fair enough,
And
yeah.
that's no different with Cincinnati. It's a good park. They have some appealing hitters at appealing price tags, but Quintana's not a bad pitcher. He's allowed like a 160 ISO to righties. It's not great, but it's not bad. He certainly can have some success here. So it's more of just that I don't have them as like a phenomenal stack in terms of likelihood of winning the slate.
Yep, and I think that's a good point. Uh, let's talk about Atlanta and St. Louis. Adam Wainwright, Julio Teheran. Adam Wainwright this season, actually, from a results standpoint, has not been that bad. That said, you're also talking about a guy that on the year has a dismal 6.9% swinging strike rate. Of all of the 10 games on this day, not the slate, but all the 10 games on the day, he has the lowest swinging strike rate of any pitcher out there. He's definitely gotten fortunate with called strikeouts. Get this. Almost 50% of his strikeouts are called strikeouts this season, Adam.
That's impressive.
It's crazy, right? But the question is, how long does that last, number one? And number two, even if that's the case, you know that balls are going to be put in play against Adam Wainwright. So I'll turn it over to you here. Both teams with a total above 5.1 for the Braves against Wainwright, and 5 even for St. Louis against Julio Teheran, with this game coming in Atlanta.
Yeah, so I have interest. I have a lot of interest in both offenses here. Atlanta against Wainwright, he's been good against righties this year. He's struck out about 25%, hasn't allowed much power at all. Against lefties, he's still been really bad, though. A 410 WOBA, 307 ISO allowed, 375 expected WOBA, 216 expected ISO, just a 3.6% swinging strike percentage. So automatically you get Freddie Freeman, jumping as a really good play at a price tag that's not even all that expensive. But the right-handed bats in the top 4 are just good hitters. You have Acuna, who we know is really, really good. Swanson seems to have turned the corner, and it's at least reasonable to believe that that's real, considering that this is a former first overall pick. Yeah. He was regarded as a good hitting prospect. It's not like he was, a defense first shortstop or something. And
he's
like
always
that.
hit. He's always hit lefties decently. This is the first year he's actually hitting righties for power.
Yeah, and his expected stats back that up too. I put them in the deep dive article. His expected ISO is also over 200. His expected WOBA is higher than his actual WOBA. So, so far, he actually looks legitimate. Shortstop's really bad, and he's inexpensive. So, you get that, and then you get Donaldson, who is obviously a good hitter. You follow that up with some cheap guys, and Markakis from the left side, Austin Riley, who homered yesterday, I think almost homered twice, and then Brian McCann, a lefty catcher, and then Ozzie Albies, who is talented, but so far can't hit right-handed pitching. The point here just being that from a talent perspective and a pricing perspective, Atlanta is a pretty easy team to get to. Wainwright isn't someone that I'm shying away from taking hitters against. So I do have Atlanta as a top stack here. And then on the other side for the Cardinals, it's the same thing we talk about a lot. St. Louis is just a really talented offense. Teheran hasn't been bad. He's always been pretty good against righties. He has improved a bit against lefties, even going back to last year, hasn't allowed a ton of power to them. But you just have such good hitters on the Cardinals that I think maybe they go a little bit under-owned, just because I think people will gravitate towards the Reds, gravitate toward the Braves, gravitate toward the Blue Jays. You're starting to run out of places for people to be allocating ownership. So I do like the Cardinals as a tournament stack, because it's not the most likely spot to succeed, but they do just have so much power top to bottom in this lineup that I think comes in a little bit under-owned.
Okay. There's a similar team that I feel that way about. We'll get to that later in the show, but ownership is pretty low. Even the top value probability is kind of low, but a lot of that probably has to do with the park. But good hitters with a lot of power. We'll get to that in a couple of games here. Is there anything else specifically you want to touch on here? Is there any interest in Julio Teheran, who has always been decent against righties, or is this one all bats for you?
It's all bats for me. The only way I would see really getting to Teheran is if the Cardinals' projected ownership skyrocketed between now and lock, which I'm not expecting to be the case. But, if you were getting leverage with Julio Teheran, then it would be interesting. But I don't think you're getting that much leverage, and there's other pitching spots I'd rather get to.
All right. Toronto and the White Sox, Marcus Stroman and Dylan Covey. We had a long discussion about this, Jake and myself, this morning, where it's like, where when it comes to ownership, like how are you going to play this? Because, Stroman's 37% projected ownership on DraftKings. Actually, now he's down to 31. Eric Lauer's at 31. Trevor Williams, who I think could be interesting, is at 27. So like, if even Michael Pineda is at 22% on a two-pitcher site. So if you're really trying to get away from the field, and this is kind of what you alluded to at the top of the show, you're looking at a Dylan Covey or like an Adam Wainwright, maybe an Eric Swanson. On Yahoo, you're talking about Stroman being 43%, Williams 45%, Lauer 38%. They're up there. Even Pineda, again, 25%, Tiran 24%. So the only pitchers that aren't going to be quote unquote chalk are pretty bad pitchers, which is why I really don't have a problem getting to some Stroman. I get it. He doesn't have the highest upside, Adam. I understand that, but neither does Trevor Williams, neither does Eric Lauer. And he has a good matchup against a K-heavy White Sox team. And from a run prevention standpoint, I do have a lot of respect for Stroman. So kind of a product of the slate of what I'm given and having to work with. I still have quite a bit of interest in Stroman, whereas on another slate, I might not have any. What about you?
Right. So I'm getting to a lot of Stroman too. This game is kind of a game that I was referring to at the top when I was talking about the different approach maybe between if you're running 150 lineups or if you're not. Stroman, I do really like because the White Sox do strike out. He's a good pitcher from a run prevention standpoint. He has a good strikeout pitch. He just doesn't utilize it
That's
all,
a good
all that
point.
much in his slider. So there is at least a clear path for how he does have a good game here, but he's also affordable and he's good at preventing runs. Like you said, he always has been. A 3.8 xFIP this year, 20.6% strikeout percentage. It's a scary spot because of the ballpark and because there is so much power in the White Sox lineup. According to the stack tool, the last time I looked at it, the White Sox actually had the biggest discrepancy between probability of being the highest scoring stack on the slate and projected ownership, like a 7.5% chance of being the highest scoring stack, but only 2 to 3% ownership. So if you were looking for a leverage stack that gives you a lot of upside, the White Sox jump out is probably the best one to go to. That being said, I'm not getting to a lot of them because in my lineups, I'm just getting more Stroman than I am White Sox, but that's certainly one spot that you could look to pivot to. And then similarly, Dylan Covey, as you mentioned, he's terrible. He's not good. He doesn't get strikeouts. His numbers at AAA this year were better than they had been in the past, but there's nothing that I can find in his couple of outings in the majors so far that suggests anything has really changed.
No,
he's got a splitter
he's still
instead
trash.
of a changeup.
He's still
he's not
bad.
good.
Yeah.
Right. But you are talking about a Blue Jays team that has strikeouts, and the bigger be 68 hours.
Yeah, can't hear you.
Per time. We can get about 9%. We our project 30%.
Can't hear you, Adam.
Because I can have ways to differentiate elsewhere.
You couldn't hear anything you said in the past minute. I was trying to tell you. You're just completely robotized. I'm going to have you refresh. Dude, we got to get you a damn modem stat. So I'll let him come back. I'm going to have him refresh and come back and get to whatever it was you were talking about. Refresh your Zoom app. Assuming he was saying Dylan Covey is really bad, but so is this slate. No one's going to play him. And that's about it. Oh, and also the fact that Toronto, because I get where he's going with this, it does make sense. Especially like I think Adam was saying earlier, if you're playing 150 lineups, this is a Toronto team that against right-handed pitching has been anything but extraordinary this season, right? They are towards the top of the league in strikeouts, third highest K rate. They are, or fourth highest K rate. They're 84 WRC plus against righties, ranks, let's see, 26th in the league. And their ISO, they do have a little bit of power, but it is still a bottom 10 mark. It's not unrealistic to think that for a day, Dylan Covey could turn himself into a somewhat reasonably decent pitcher. It's unlikely, but it's possible. All right, what were you saying? I think I didn't hear you, but I'm pretty sure I have a good idea of what you were saying. In case I'm totally wrong, go ahead and just give your Covey spiel one more time, quickly.
Yeah, I think it's basically what you just said. It's that I don't have him projected nearly as good as Eric Lauer, but I also don't have him as a 6-1 dog to reach his target score compared to Lauer. And I don't see myself getting to Covey because across an entire player pool or across an entire portfolio of 150 lineups, I have ways that I can differentiate within those lineups that don't involve Dylan Covey. But if you're trying to take down one of these large field tournaments with limited entries, going from Lauer to Covey is one of the more, I think, mathematically sound ways to do it. Even though Covey's not good, it's still a one game sample size, and he easily can beat Eric Lauer, who's going to have tons more ownership.
I agree. And that is, I think, probably the most important point that needs to be driven home. That Eric Lauer has 120 fantasy point game all season long, right? And it was 20.5 fantasy points. Over the course of a season, will he be more consistently decent than Covey? Yes, but this is one out of the 30-plus starts he's going to make. So I get what you're saying. What about hitters?
I mean, I like the Blue Jays. They're facing Dylan Covey. I was actually surprised. He's actually allowed a 100 ISO to righties since last year. I know he's a ground ball pitcher, but that was better than I expected. That being said, you do still have Randall Grichuk in the middle of this order, Vlad Guerrero hitting second. Both of those guys with tons of power, and then you have Justin Smoke, a big time power lefty. Those three, obviously the priorities for me. Teoscar Hernandez was sent to the minors, which was unfortunate. But, Eric Sogard is just a really annoying hitter that can get on base. Galvis is batting fifth at a weak shortstop position. You can roster Drury at second base. The guys that aren't as good, as Guerrero, Smoke, and Grichuk, which again I think is the priority, are at least cheap, and several of them play weak positions. So it makes for an appealing stack in that regard. It's an appealing mini stack, if you're just looking for one or two guys that can homer off of Covey.
All right. So Minnesota and Seattle. I was kind of teasing this a little while ago. I think. Well, you know what? I guess we can talk about pitching first. I was gonna say I think Seattle is one of my favorite high upside stacks on this slate. You can have games where Pineda looks really good, and I'm willing to just eat that if I end up being wrong on it. But this is also a pitcher in Pineda who can absolutely collapse at any given time. I say this a lot. Like, he is very capable of falling off a cliff in any game and not being able to regain control of himself or of his pitches. And you're talking about a Seattle Mariners team. I don't believe we have a lineup yet. Let me refresh just to make sure. No, I don't think we do. But you're talking about a Mariners team this season that has, and by the way, if you wanted to play Pineda, fine, but he struggled against righties. I get it. Seattle's K rate's kind of high. But actually, maybe it isn't. Hold on. Yeah, 20, middle of the road. Here's where they rank against righties this year, Adam. 4th in WRC plus, 1st in isolated slugging. Yes, above the Astros, the Rangers, the Twins, the Dodgers, above all of them. And in weighted on base average, they are 4th. So this is a team, to me, that can put up sizable run totals. They also have a little bit of speed, not a ton, a little bit, but that's not what I'm worried about. they could put up sizable run totals against the guy in Pineda, who there's no doubt in my mind is as capable of anyone as collapsing, and is allowing 2.39 home runs per nine to righties this year with 397 WOBA, 275 ISO, and a 16% K minus BB rate. So the runs are here to be had if we get bad Pineda today.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Seattle is one of the more under-owned teams, according to the stack tool, as of last time I checked it too. That being said, I got to almost 0 of them in my crunch. I don't feel good about that. It really, really scares me. I'm hoping that something changes in my stuff between now and lock. But as of right now, I don't have it, and I'm just hoping that it works out. But I agree with everything you said. Like, there's a ton of power here. Pineda hasn't been as good as far as getting swings and misses as he was before his injury. He has always had a home run issue, and he's giving up plenty of power this year. It stands out as a spot where Seattle does offer a ton of upside at low ownership. So I do like the idea of going to Seattle, like you said.
All right. What do you make of pitching in this one? Eric Swanson and Michael Pineda.
I don't have interest in the pitching. Pineda, just like I said, not getting swings and misses like he used to, facing a good Seattle offense. And then Swanson, I think, is a decent young pitcher, but it's a really difficult matchup for him here against Minnesota. And I really like the Minnesota bats. They have Kepler, Rosario, obviously good hitters from the left side, Jorge Polanco as well, even though he's expensive. No Nelson Cruz is disappointing, but you do get Jonathan Scope now hitting third at a reasonable price tag at a terrible second base position. CJ Cron has power. Marwin Gonzalez is still free. Miguel Sano adds more power to the lineup. Jason Castro, I think, is one of the better catching options on the slate just because he has almost a 180 ISO since 2017 against righties. And, you're just basically looking for power there. But Swanson hasn't done a very good job of limiting power against him so far this season. Obviously it's only a couple of starts, but not getting a lot of strikeouts. He's allowed over a 200 ISO to both sides of the plate. He also throws a lot of strikes, and that increases the upside for a stack because, obviously it increases. A team's going to score more runs if you're putting extra guys on base, but that doesn't necessarily translate to fantasy points. Right. You don't want your guys up there walking, and Swanson throughout the minors has shown the ability to throw strikes. So I think that gives Minnesota a little bit higher ceiling as well.
All right. Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. But again, going back to a slate like this, in some spots you got to be a little bit different. I do right now. I expect the Seattle bats to be at least relatively low owned. Other than Mitch Haniger, I don't see a lot of projected Seattle ownership whatsoever. Like, the next closest guy is Domingo Santana at 12% on a 5-game slate. So that's pretty low given
I'm hoping I get to more Seattle now that we got the Minnesota lineup, because I know I had tons of Nelson Cruz. So hopefully him being out will just shift some of my lineups.
Well, especially considering Encarnacion and Vogelbach are both only first base eligible. So, when you're stacking the Mariners, usually you're going to want to have a first baseman in there. Oh, I'm sorry. What am I talking about, dude? I was thinking Cruz. I was thinking Cruz was first base. Yep, that doesn't work. Although they got a bunch of outfielders too. So
yeah, that's where I was going with it. Also, dude, I was only.
Go ahead.
In the initial crunch, I'd only run my 5-man stacks too. So maybe once I run some 4-4s or 4-3s, I'll start getting there.
No, it has something to do with the first base. That's what it is. Dude, I don't know why it's like a brain malfunction where I always assume that Nelson Cruz is first base eligible. Like has multi-position eligibility at first base outfield. I don't know why.
I mean, he probably should be a first baseman, but he's not.
Yeah. I swear he used to have first base eligibility. Maybe not. Probably not. I don't know. Anyway, you want to get to the last game here?
Yeah.
All right. Before we do, for those of you that are new to the channel, new to the show, welcome. We're glad to have you here. And if you wanted to check out awesomemode.com, we'd love to have you do so. You could take a look around, do some window shopping, or you can dive in and get 50% off your first month of premium subscription. All you got to do is use the promo code DEEPERDIVE. It's the name of the show. One word, Deeper Dive, to get 50% off your first month. The ownership projections that we referenced, the player projections, the Awesemo stack tool that we just mentioned right now. All of that is on the site. The lineup builder, Fantasy Cruncher add-on, including Fantasy Cruncher Pro, long and solid, elaborate, laborious articles from Adam and myself and from Josh Engelman, of course, from Ben Rasa, all of his PGA content, so much more. We don't have time. And our sponsor, Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. Proud to have them as our sponsor and as a site where I know a lot of our members and viewers have been playing lately, because you don't have to compete against the guy maxing out 150 entries. And, you have an opportunity to win a couple $1,000s for first place going up against guys that only have a max of 10 entries. And the management fee is only 12%, sometimes lower. So what I'm doing now is dropping the link into chat. And for all of you ladies and men who have yet to check it out and want to get up to $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points, them YSRPs, just use the code AWESOMO when you sign up through this link, and you will get it. You can use that as currency on the site to win real money and then withdraw it. So there you have it. I posted the link in there, and we hope to see you guys over there as well. We appreciate Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports sponsoring this wonderful show known as The Deeper Dive. All right, Adam, I'm out of breath. What do you got on Pittsburgh and San Diego, starting with... Hey, I got to do it. It's my job, man. Starting with the Padres or starting with the pitchers in this game.
Yeah, it's pretty much all I'm interested in this game. Starting with Lauer. It's a Pirates team that has been absolutely awful against left-handed pitching this year. The third worst xWOBA or WRC plus in baseball against lefties. Not a ton of strikeouts in the lineup still, but that's not really what you're looking for from Lauer anyway. You're basically just taking a cheap pitcher who is in a decent pitcher's park facing a not very good Pittsburgh lineup and hoping he gives you 6 innings, strikes out 4 or 5 guys, doesn't give up more than a couple of runs, and that your bats win it for you. That's pretty much what you're looking for. He's got a 19.8% strikeout percentage this year, a 4.7 xFIP. He's not great. And that goes back to what we were saying with Dylan Covey, where it's certainly a viable strategy to be pivoting some Lauer to Covey just because of ownership, because Lauer's not a particularly good pitcher. But it's not a good Pittsburgh lineup they're running out here. You have Jake Elmore in the lineup, who is not good. Kevin Newman hitting 8th. Diaz in for Cervelli lowers the strikeout percentage a bit. That's a downgrade for Lauer. But overall, it's just not a very good lineup. And he's cheap, so that's basically why I'm getting to Lauer. On the other side, I'm getting a lot of Trevor Williams too, which is really, really unusual for me. But
I like him tonight.
San Diego, San Diego is basically the perfect matchup for Trevor Williams.
Exactly.
Because he's a pretty good pitcher overall in terms of limiting production, but he's much better against righties. He's allowed a 272 WOBA with a little over a 20% strikeout percentage to righties this year. Most of the San Diego lineup is right-handed. They have a lot of power, but Williams does a good job of limiting that, and they strike out a lot on their own. You don't have to be a great strikeout pitcher to strike out the Padres. So I'm getting to a lot of Trevor Williams. Getting like Williams plus Stroman lets me get to more expensive bats, obviously, than in my Castillo lineups. It's just a good spot for Williams. On a bigger slate, I probably would skip over an $8,300 Williams just because there isn't the most upside in the world. But on this particular slate, I think that there's more than enough given the other pitching options.
There isn't much upside anywhere pitching on this slate outside of like Luis Castillo, who is just in a whole nother world, So
right.
I think Trevor Williams is perfectly fine. And it's not like, it's not like he's priced through the roof or anything. He's not dirt cheap, but he's not going to cost you a ton either. I think, I'd love it if he was 7,300, but what can you do against righties though? 3% walk rate, man. Like his K rate is the epitome of league average. I get that even against righties, but everything you pointed out, and he is not allowing a lot of power to righties. Never really has. 0.73 whip against righties on sites like DraftKings, where you get docked points for walks and for hits. Trevor Williams actually has more value because of that, man. He doesn't give up a ton of base runners, which will, to some extent, on a slate like this at least, mitigate the lack of strikeouts Think of Zach Greinke the other day or yesterday. He only had like 4 Ks, but he gives you good point totals because he allowed 3 base runners. You know what I mean? DraftKings, you want the Ks, but if you can not allow any base runners, it at least helps it along a little bit if you aren't getting strikeouts.
Yeah, for sure. It's just a good spot for Williams. One thing I did miss was that Elias Diaz being 3,100 batting 6th against Lauer is a perfectly fine catcher play.
I think so too. Dude, I was rostering Ben Boom yesterday, so I'll play anyone at the backstop position. He got hurt too. What did you say? His name with the name he has, he should be a power hitter.
He sounds like he should be good at hitting.
I know. But I guess Keyboom should too.
I think, well, he is. He just hasn't shown that in the majors.
Fair enough. It's Keyboom or Keyboom?
Carter. Spencer can. Carter.
Right. Yeah, I was talking about the first one that came up, the catcher.
Yeah, he can.
Not the Nationals guy. Anyway.
They're both Nationals guys.
Oh, that's right. But the second one just came up, and he's an infielder, isn't he?
Yeah. The shortstop can hit. The catcher can't.
Right. Yeah. Shortstop can also strike out. I'll tell you that much.
He also can't play defense. So
yeah.
He
better be able to hit. Yeah, exactly. All right. Top stacks. Hey, before you guys head out, we're going to do our top stacks. Hit us with a thumbs up if you like the video, you like our content, you want to see more, you want to support the channel. It helps us out a lot, as you know, and we really appreciate it. Every time you hit us with a thumbs up and like the video. Subscribe, hit the notification bell as well, so you always know when new content's dropping next. Like if Adam's internet isn't working and we don't start till like 5:10, you don't have to wait around because you know that the show didn't start yet. Anyway, I know the notification. What?
I said that would never happen.
Never. I know the notification system's all whacked out on YouTube sometimes anyway, but it's definitely a nice little safety net there. Top stacks, Adam. Go ahead.
St. Louis, Minnesota, Atlanta, Toronto.
All right. We're a little bit different here because I'm gonna be putting a lot of eggs in the Mariners basket based on ownership, and you don't have them in your top 5, so that's gonna go one way or the other. I'll go. I'm gonna have the Mariners towards the top, St. Louis and Atlanta, obviously, and then Toronto. Yeah, Toronto. What? Let me ask you this. We got to be out in a minute, and then we're turning it over to live before lock. We've got Jake and Chris coming up, taking you till 6:40. So, what do you think of White Sox bats? Is there any merit to considering them? Just quick answer, since we didn't talk about them at all.
Yeah, as of before this show, when I looked at the stacking tool, they actually were the most under-owned stack in terms of percentage of being the top scoring stack on the slate compared to ownership. You get leverage against Stroman. They're a spot where I think you certainly you understand that it's not coming through all that often,
right?
But when it does, you profit more than when you're on a really popular stack.
All right, that'll do it for us. Thanks for hanging out. We will see you back here tomorrow to close out the work week. Good luck to everybody tonight. Appreciate you tuning in as always. And don't go anywhere. Stay on the channel. Jake and Chris are coming up next live before lock. Peace.